Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the Ice, Amateur Sports TV. Thanks for joining us Tuesdays and Thursday nights, as always, 7 o'clock Central. I have some great guests coming from all over Canada, as well as the United States. Today's episode involved a little bit of financial, a little bit of money matters when it comes to hockey, youth sports, and the fact that hockey should not be considered as just a recreational sport. It is a commitment by both players, families, coaches, and organizations. We also understand the expenses to which hockey and its sport entail. But having that said, it also drives certain parts of the economy in all small communities and large communities throughout here in Canada. And joining me is Director of Performance Hockey Development out of Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Kevin Henry is going to sit down with us, and we're going to chat more about what these implications are for small towns, his own business, as well as his two sons that are involved in youth hockey in Prince Albert. So please join me in welcoming Kevin Henry to On the Ice. Kevin Henry, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Director, Performance Hockey Development. Thanks for joining me on the show, Kevin.
Oh, nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. So give us a little bit of a background, Kevin, with your development with PhD, how it all started, and what your program and what your business helps out with younger athletes.
Yeah, well, I came up with the idea. I always kind of want to do something on my own. I'd previously kind of helped and watched other skill coaches and just my athletic background. It just seemed like a natural progression to do something like that. And it was sort of, I spent years kind of learning the craft before I actually went into it. And I started actually in 2016, 2017, that would have been, and performance hockey development actually, it was a lady that actually, she was a doctor, and she was a PhD. And I sort of thought, oh, PhD, that has a kind of a nice ring to it. So I sort of used it as a bit of an acronym, and I kind of thought of it in terms of hockey development. And this lady was a professor, and I thought, okay, well, that, I wanted to sound professional. I wanted to sound like people were really learning. So I went with performance hockey development, and it just sort of took off from there. Actually, it was a nice little idea that just kind of has slowly gained momentum over the years here.
The momentum has certainly slowed over the last 10 months, would you say, Kevin? And have your numbers dropped because of this pandemic? And if so, what has that done for you personally in your own business?
The numbers unfortunately have dropped, and the demand is there. But when you're trying to factor in work life, plus you're doing development, plus, maintaining that balance, I guess in theory, I could get more ice time during the week and run more groups, but the profit margins just aren't there, because at my peak, I had as many as 20 on the ice, and I didn't like to go more than 18 or 20. Ideally 12 to 15 is perfect. But I'm not I like to run my groups a certain way, and I like to have certain skills put together, like certain level of skilled players put together. And I found that this has really been hard on everybody. And plus the other side of it too, it's tough to maintain players' interests when they're doing skill development with their teams, plus doing skill development with people like myself. Here in Saskatchewan, we're lucky we have quite a few high-end skill developers, and essentially everyone kind of has their little niche in how they develop players. And I'm known more for my skating and edge work and stuff like that, and helping players get that polished look skating. That's sort of how I've been described, but it still affects all of us, and it cuts into our bottom line. So in two groups before, I would have probably anywhere between 28 and 40. Now I have 16. So it's basically cut everything in half in a lot of ways.
Yeah. How many figure skaters have you had in your classes?
Actually, I'm surprised I haven't had any. I'm not really sure what figure skaters are doing at this point, but I'm not sure how that'll work out as far as for that side of the sport. But yeah, definitely I do, especially with the edge work. I definitely could use a couple figure skaters in there. Maybe show some of these boys what to do, because if there's anything that's good on their edges, it's definitely figure skaters.
How many hockey players have you had that started figure skating? That's my next question. Do you know of the background of any of you guys?
I actually had three, and the one I was actually really surprised of. He's kind of a gritty kid, and he's pretty tough on his feet. And I remember when I was like, my parents put me in figure skating. And I was like 5 and 6, but really, like it was pretty shocking to see it. But I thought it was cool. Actually, I love, like, I think figure skating is great for learning to skate. And even when I was a little guy, many years ago, my twin brother and we played against a player who was a fantastic skater, and then we finally figured out this guy was doing figure skating the entire time, and the guy was just a phenomenal skater. And we always kind of, you kind of have that macho kind of view, and I'm not going to go figure skating, but at the end of the day, they do great work with their skating. You can't take that away from figure skating at all.
I remember I got kicked out of my figure skating class at 6 because I stole the board with all the instructions, because I didn't want to do circle edges anymore, and that was where I went straight to hockey, my brother and I. So I'll digress there. But yeah, edges and figure skaters go hand in hand. Kevin, talk about the niches. Stick development, puck handling, edge work, balance. You become more of a aficionado when it comes to edge work and whatnot. How important is that now when you look at separation and stride efficiency from opposing players in small areas on the ice?
Oh, it is. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, I'll be brutally honest with you. I think that part of the game is the difference on whether players actually play at an elite level or not an elite level. And it's as simple as that. It's black and white. Though the players nowadays, you have to be able to transition on a dime. You have to be able to use those edges, especially when you're in tight against the boards and you're on a one-on-one, two-on-one, two-on-two battle down low. You have to be able to move those feet in a 360-degree radius at any moment. You have to be able to do it efficiently while moving the puck. So when you're talking edge work, and I call it radius, being different people have different I guess names for it. Myself, I call radius, and that's sort of what I sort of go with my players, because I always talk about almost I guess you could call it geotrigonometry a bit, right? It's like angles and using your legs in the right direction. And there's a lady here in Saskatchewan, and I've watched a couple of her practice, and oh my God, she has phenomenal work. Lynn Davies out of Regina, and she's worked with a lot of pro players and stuff. And it's just I watch it. I'm a bit of a science geek myself, so I really like that side of it, trying to teach players, making sure their hips are in the right spot and making sure they're down low, they're bending at the right angle, they're using that inside outside edge, how to use the entire part of their blade, because probably I would say 40 to 60% it'd be somewhere in the middle, players that use only the front part of their blade when they're skating, because they're just not leaning back, they're not sitting back on their blade using that full stride, and it takes at least 20% of their speed away. And nowadays the speed of the game is it's people, I know a lot of people, they wish we could go a little bit further back in time and have a bit more of a rough and tumble style game, and I do like that. Like I like the rough stuff. I like the bang and grind, like the bump and grind of hockey. But when you look at the speed these guys are going up, in some ways, thank God they're not running into each other as much out there, because there'd be a lot more concussions. Because you take a guy like, he's the best in the world, Connor McDavid. I think they timed him was that against Vancouver? Was it 37? I think it was 37 kilometers, or maybe it was in miles an hour, I believe.
I thought it was 27 miles an hour.
Oh, was it 27? Yeah. Like, you think about that. That's a speed of almost a vehicle coming at you. Like, and when those guys are running to each other like that, the velocity and sort of the kinetic energy that's transferred from that body weight onto you, it's 150-pound guys, like a 400-pound guy when he hits you when you're going at that speed. It's just creates a lot of danger on the ice, right? So that's why I think, if you're serious about playing hockey, you have to have that skating in there. There's no two ways about it.
I'm going to ask you another question before we change topics. Every time you hear an analyst on TV or on the radio say, oh, he's a great draft pick, he's a round one potential, and his skating isn't great, but that's something he can work on when he gets into development. Is it too late when you're 18, 19 years old to change your stride, because you have to kind of go back to the drawing board and fix everything? Or, I mean, I remember learning skating when I was in my early teens with David Roy back in the Edge of Excellence, pump his tires real quick. But, I mean, learning about the full edge, like you said, both edges, skating to the side to go forward, north and south. I mean, when you hear that from an analyst, do you kind of eke yourself and be like, you should have started sooner, pal?
In some ways, yes. Like, I'm not saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but it's a lot harder to teach the old dog. It really is. And especially a lot of players, once they get to that level, everything is almost instinct. And how do you have a player change an instinct? It runs a lot deeper than just saying, "Okay, do this 20 times and you got it." I mean, it takes a specific skating coach working with that player relentlessly. It might take years still, even at that point, even to change out of that habit, and they might not. It varies player to player. Not saying it can't happen, but it's definitely a lot tougher. I do cringe a bit because I think these are skills kids should be starting right at 5, 6, 7 years old. And even it's kind of funny, we kind of both touched on the figure skating side of it, but there's something to be said about that. There really is. And whether you do it through a hockey side with someone like myself, or you do it on the figure skating side, those principles definitely make you a better hockey player down the road for sure. Because when your instinct is to always be like that on your feet, that's the best way to be, because you don't know how to be any other way. And when you're the opposite side, it is a lot tougher, because you're going to be playing against players who do normally do that. Like, I watched Connor McDavid play, and when he even I believe it was last year, or was it 2 years ago, like, he went around Morgan Riley, and Morgan Riley's a phenomenal player, and he made Morgan Riley look like he was in street shoes out there, because Morgan Riley just couldn't, like, he sort of misjudged the angle he was taking him out at, and Connor just went at him with speed, and the speed kills. I mean, speed is the hardest thing to play against on that ice, and there's no two ways about it. It is tough to change a player at 17, 18, 19. It can be done, but there has to be a willingness on the player to maybe drop their ego a bit enough to want to still learn that kind of stuff at that age.
So with your program at the PhD, what is the youngest and latest ages you work with, and how does that program evolve based on the age of participant?
I've had as young as 6 years old, and I've had as old as 18. I've been all up and down the board. I have one group that I would say, for example, last night I worked with Caisse Minor Hockey last night, and I have the little group, and they are all 6, 7, 8 year olds, and they're really cute, actually. I really enjoy that, and kind of teach them how to do that. And they look at me like I'm crazy, like, what are we doing this for? They have no idea, but they do it, and they keep doing it, and we just keep working on our little inside edges wide and outside edge, trying to teach them how to step front, sweep that skate blade all the way through. You try to add the movement of their hips, rotate their hips inside, and I try to talk to them at their level, and they just probably think I'm talking Greek to them, but they're such a nice group to work with. And then I get the Bantam, I guess the U15s is what they're called now, and they're out next. And I see all the habits that, if they would have started at that level, would be a lot easier to teach them at this level. But they work hard. That is such a nice group to work with. I really enjoy that group. And there's only a couple AA players in that group, but the entire group, so I got 8 and 8, and they just work phenomenally hard. They're such a good program to work with. The junior players actually have been, truthfully, it's kind of ironically you talked about the 18-year-olds. The junior players are actually the hardest players to work with. Last summer I had nine U18 AAA players. I had 6 SJ players, and I had 2 WHL players, and this was over the summertime. And those teenagers were the hardest ones to work with. And they'd show up, and they kind of giving you the stinky eye and all that stuff, and but it's all relative, right? And for a lot of it, it's how you deliver that message to the player, right? I mean, we live in a time where we've made things so scientific that there is a lot of confusion for players now, especially the way we're talking how we skate. Like, I'm talking about in the 80s when I skated and I learned to skate, oh my God, like, there was none of this, none. I kind of laugh because my sons will ask me about, what was hockey like compared that back then to now? It's like, well, you guys would have probably cleaned our clocks, to be brutally honest with you. Like, we just didn't skate like you guys. There's just no doubt about that one. There wasn't the consistency on the ice, the repetition on the ice. The coaches just coached a different way, and it was all about being tough back then. There was such an emphasis on toughness. What you're seeing now is the evolution of the game, and we're almost at a point in hockey where I almost wonder if we're going to have to go to Olympic-sized ice just to keep everyone safe because of the speed of the game. I do think there is an argument for that for sure, because when you're paying someone, $3, $5, $10, $11 million in the NHL a season, that's not the player you want sitting out for 4 or 5 games when you're trying to sell tickets based on that player, right? So I do wonder if that's coming down the road too for the next evolution of the game, is a little bit bigger ice surface so players can move a little more safely on the ice, right? So and everything nowadays seems to be gearing towards safety and whatnot. So
you've hit several good cliches. Speed kills. You can't hit what you can't catch. In the 80s, the puck certainly moved a lot faster than the player. I remember those days.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word safety, and we're going to get to that right after the break, because the message we've been receiving over the last 10 months, has it really been about safety? Has it been about control? And we'll talk not so much about that, but the financial implications of not playing hockey in every province, but mainly Saskatchewan, because that's what we're talking about here, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, here on the ice.
Yep.
Joining me from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Kevin Henry, the director of PhD. Kevin, you've got 2 sons in youth sports hockey, correct?
Yes.
How old?
Yeah, well, my one son, Matthew Henry, he's 16 years old. He plays U18 AAA for the Battleford AAA Stars. And my other son is in U15. He's in Prince Albert here. Dane Henry plays with the Prince Albert Venice House Pirates.
Okay, so 2 boys not playing hockey competitively.
Mm-hmm.
How has that been for them during this time, especially when your hands are up in the air saying, when do we get to play, Dad? When can we play a meaningful game?
With Dane, he's a little bit more of he's just more of a gentle soul, a little quieter. He doesn't say as much, but he still talks about it quite. He does bring it up that do you think we'll play, or do you think it's going to be next year, or what do you think is going to happen? Like, he's more analytical about it, where the older son is a lot more panicky because he sort of had a plan in place of where he wanted to be in terms of his going into next year, and it looks like he'll play with the SHL Junior A Battleford Stars program. But the original plan was for him to get 40 to 50 games in his U18 AAA league as a first line player, and obviously the experience of the Max or the Kelowna tournament, and then look at 6 to 8 in junior hockey, and possibly look at Lethbridge, because that's who he's protected by, is the Lethbridge Hurricanes. And so that kind of puts everything back a year. And he's been really, really, really vocal and really, really upset and emotional. And I've had to actually have quite a few talks with him just to kind of get him to see the light, so to speak, and just try to get him to just not want to quit, or even just to get him not to be so panicky about it, right? Because especially, well, as with most teens, they're emotional. Your hormones are all out of. I mean, you got testosterone like a lion in you, and they're emotional, right? It's so everything for them is exponentially. If it's a 2 out of 10 problem to you, people like you and I, to them it's a 20 out of 10. They just see life that way, right? And they haven't experienced enough of life to see outside of what their needs are. So they get really, really upset. And even with a couple players on that team, I've had a couple of conversations with. It's all the same, and the problem is they all talk to each other on they go for coffee or they have their little Snapchat talks, and everyone starts. One guy's getting mad now. 3 guys are mad now. 5 guys are mad, and like no one's mad at their programs, their teams, that kind of thing. They're just mad at the situation, mad in general. So and they feel it's unfair and all the rest of it, right? So
the situation came down earlier this month where Saskatchewan Hockey, youth hockey, made an announcement. Clarify that announcement, and what does that mean for a lack thereof start of a 21 part of the season in Saskatchewan? Because right now here in Manitoba, we're under the same boat where that window of opportunity is slowing down and getting smaller each day. We've had senior leagues already canceled. We don't know what's going to happen with minor sports. Give us a bit of a clarification, Kevin, on that announcement that was made and moving forward here, potentially.
Well, the clarification was originally we thought that it was going to be completely shut down. They're still allowing for small group skill development and team development if teams continue to want to move forward. Because originally the fear was that, we're going to get shut down completely here and everyone's hockey season is completely done. Unfortunately, we haven't played a game since November, so it's been 2 months roughly. And I know with Matthew's team, in I think most of the AAA league now here, they're talking about sending players home, like giving players the option to go home, do their skill development at home. And some of the coaches are staying back with the programs and offering the skill development. But the other side of that is, even with the AAA programs, if you were when you have 20 players on a roster, 8, that's 16. You're only getting an hour and a half of ice per day. So that's 45 minutes. Now, is it feasible for the team to also start grabbing more ice? The one gentleman a friend of mine that is down south, their program decided to grab an extra ice session per day or per practice day. And so he had to go back to the parents for an extra $700 for team fees. And they haven't played they haven't played since November. And here he is now at this time asking for $700 more to continue for another month or 2 months, just because their ice costs now have jumped up exponentially because they have to grab extra ice just to accommodate their players. And so it really is tough. It is very, very tough for everybody right now here. And people are being creative. Like, that's the one thing is everybody is looking for ways to find a way to continue evolving as hockey players, but it's getting to a point where people just the frustration is becoming too much. And I know with Dane's program, they have 17 or 18 players on that team. So what they do is they just do the 45, 8 and 8, and then two players sit out, and you just rotate 2 players each time there's practice. So it's essentially those players lose out on, and if you add that up, right, if you miss a couple times as we a couple sessions over the month, I mean, you're missing out on 4.5 hours, possibly 4.5 hours of development.
So that's just ice time, and I'm assuming
Yes.
that it's only 8 participants allowed at a time on ice in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
And we're not even scratching the surface when it comes to supporting the local community in travel, expenses, hotels. We talk about the equipment that is required for players. All of these industries that have been affected, in firsthand when hockey stops. Now, we're only focusing on hockey because this is a hockey show, but you can relate that to soccer. You can relate that to baseball, football, indoor soccer, every sport you think of. This shutdown of minor sports in our country has not done well for many industry and many people within their community. Correct, Kevin?
Well, the implications have been astronomical. I'm not really sure, depending on how long this goes on for. I'm not sure how much longer some of these businesses will last. When I looked at the numbers, and I sort of do a bit of number crunching because I'm trying to, I look at my own little business there with running skill development, right? You have your ice costs and all that stuff. But when I started adding in when I put it on the level of the teams, and then I looked at our team budget on particularly Dane's and Matthew's teams, I mean, you were talking major money absolutely major money that affects people across the board. And just the operational costs. I believe the operational costs for Dane's team this year was around $100,000, and that's on the Venice House Pirates here in Prince Albert. And for the AAA programs, and all these programs are around these numbers. For the Battleford Stars, it's roughly around $250,000. So if you have 12 teams at roughly $250,000, that puts every team at an operational, the league-wide operational costs for the teams to function with practice and games. You're looking at $3 million, and in Saskatchewan with 22 teams and U15 AA, which is their draft year, you're looking at operational costs of around ballpark $2.1 million, $2.2 million. We're talking a lot of money here that affects a lot of things, and then you're looking at, as a parent, when I need a new pair of skates, when I need a new stick, where am I going? I'm going to Source for Sports here in Prince Albert, and a new pair of skates. I believe their last pair was $1,100. I think $1,100 or $1,200. Their sticks around $200 to $300, and it all seems like it never fails. They break on day 36, and the warranty went out on day 31. So you're lucky when you can get some sticks under warranty, and then sometimes you get sticks. You can go with the Pro Stock, and the Pro Stock are $180. But having said that, your coincidental costs are what keep businesses going. The operational costs keep businesses going. You're talking, the service you're providing for the rinks, the jobs that the rinks can provide for the public. You're talking the sporting goods store, the restaurant, the hotel, the gas station. It funnels out in every aspect of these communities, and it's interesting because I talked to a couple actually SJ GMs that I personally know, and we were going over some numbers. And for example, you look at the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League here. If you have a team with an operational budget of $783,000 per year, that is a little bit on the higher end, and there's ones as low as $500,000 that are able to cover costs at that amount. But if you take that $783,000, and with their city figured it out, that team, the spinoffs of that, create $1.2 million of money circulating in that community. With the outside teams coming in over the season, they figure that's an additional $2 million. So just that one team alone, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of around $4 million. They figure that all in all, between I'm just talking every aspect of every cent generated through that program and how it distributes out to the communities and whatnot for buses, restaurants, hotels, all that kind of stuff. Now, my question is, with the amount of tax revenue generated out of that, the amount of jobs created out of that, I mean, the SJHL this year played 60 games, and they actually only had two players that were actually had COVID during that time that they were allowed to play in those controlled environments. I mean, the data from the financial side and the data from the even healthcare side doesn't support shutting everything down. Like, I'm not saying that COVID isn't real. I'm not saying that it's not a threat. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm not disputing the doctor's knowledge in this. But what I am saying is we can find it. There is enough wiggle room to kind of justify continuing hockey in a controlled environment, and it should be that way across Western Canada. And people say, well, that's entitled hockey players. Well, that's this, that's that. Well, that's not accurate either, because hockey itself within Saskatchewan is a huge industry. It's an industry unto itself. And people can talk about, well, it's just a hockey factory, or you just want your kids to play. Well, no, it's not that. It's the spin-offs of this create so many jobs. For example, you look at even say our AA Pirates team at a home game. You got your 4 refs that make whatever they're making $100 plus per game. The box, the gentleman who's working the box, the official, he makes $30 a game. You got the 2 people or 1 or 2 people working in the concession. You got the 2 people working in the rink. Just that alone, just that one game alone, the spin-offs of that create 8 to 10 jobs. And that's what's going to be hurting, is if we can't find any happy middle ground on any of this stuff. I mean, there just won't be those people and those jobs available moving forward. And then where do we start from? Like, we're starting from scratch with junior hockey and minor hockey and the spin-offs, and unfortunately the negative spin-offs, where if you look at statistically, I would think ballpark, we're looking around 20-25% of kids that would just simply leave the sport. And now you factor that in across the board. You take soccer, volleyball, like club volleyball, even dance, figure skating. If that many, if that kind of percentage goes across the board, that's a lot of kids that are sitting at home doing nothing. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't respect the protocols, that we shouldn't respect COVID. That, is it dangerous? Is it real? Oh yeah, it's absolutely real. For sure it is. That part, I've never disputed that part, but I do think there is wiggle room to run hockey in a safe environment. I really believe there is. And plus, with the addition of technology, like channels like your guys's Hockey TV, various other channels, there's ways to find that safe zone so people can play. And I just wish the governments would be a little more maybe open to that, to hearing that side of it, because if you are taking out that kind of money out of the economy, how do you replace that? And where's that tax revenue going to come from? If you look at the SJ, I believe it would be in the neighborhood of 47 million just out of that league total. And I'm just talking, everything from their operational costs, team budgets, all that kind of thing. It's ballpark around 47 million if you factor in what they bring into the local economies of those communities they're in. Now, where are we going to replace $47 million just on that league alone? And the WHL, I'm going to ballpark their operational costs there probably range from 1.2 to 2.5 million. And you got say you got like, they're not in Saskatchewan, but you take a program like the Portland Winterhawks. I believe they're worth, I think their net, or their actual worth of that program is around 60 million. Like, this is a huge industry, and it should be respected as an industry, as every other industry is trying to be respected. And there should be some element of understanding. Okay, well, you guys can play, but you can't have parents, or you can have, say, whatever capacity, right? And the SJ proved it can work. Absolutely, I'm a firm believer that Saskatchewan junior hockey model was spot on. That's exactly how hockey could have ran and should have ran. Does it mean there's risks in it? Yeah, for sure, absolutely. But no one is not saying there isn't risks. What we're saying is, if we're given the platform to run in a safe manner, it can be done. Have a little bit of faith in us, right? And I think that should be the message to the government, and to the medical side of it too, because living at home and the negative spin-offs, they're talking about COVID costing us money. Well, what about the cost to the healthcare system of, our kids being in depression, our kids going through possible suicide attempts, our kids turning to a life of crime because now they've lost all faith in humanity, and they're emotional, and they start hanging around with the wrong group. As a parent, not even as a skill developer or coach or anything, as a parent, like, I worry about that stuff. I would say 95% of parents that get their kids into hockey are doing it with the original idea of trying to create a better life for them, be a better person, learn how to work under pressure, all the great life lessons that come with hockey. And as a Canadian, I mean, we grew up with hockey. It's sort of it's ingrained in us. I mean, I would imagine every sport across Western Canada would say something similar to that. I have no doubt about that. I know lots of people who play Premier Soccer, and those are phenomenal athletes, and they're every bit as passionate about their sport, and they contribute to the economy every bit as much as hockey does. Now, you add up all these sports along the way, and just in Saskatchewan alone, I would ballpark probably our gross domestic, or I guess, well, it would be gross because it'd be everything included. You'd be looking in a neighborhood of 125 to 150 million dollars that are generated in the Saskatchewan economy. Like, I'm not sure how we replace that at this point. I don't know. So the best option is, how do we find a little bit of middle ground? How do we keep our players involved and our kids involved in the sport? How do we keep the coaches involved? I know a lot of people in Saskatchewan were upset about the Saskatchewan government giving these subsidies to these teams, but what they're not realizing is that if you have a team, say an SJHL team, and your operational budget is around 700,000 a year, but the government, I think it was $1 million they gave, so it works up to roughly about 81,000 or 83,000 per team. I mean, that's just enough to keep the lights on. I mean, that's just a drop in the bucket, and at least it helps cover some wages. I mean, it's great. It's obviously appreciated. It's like everybody would, that league and the WHL, I'm sure, greatly, they're very appreciative of the Saskatchewan government stepping up like that. But I believe the Saskatchewan government should step up in every way. I'm not talking financially. I'm talking just saying, okay, guys, let's sit down with the Saskatchewan Hockey Association and let's figure out an actual plan of how we can play games so kids don't leave the sport. Because with that, when you're talking the negative side of it, and you got your 2000s and you got your 2003s, those two groups are directly affected because the 2000s are going to be aged out, and they don't have that might be it for hockey for them. The 2003s, they missed their high school graduation like the 2002s did. The 2003s are going to be stuck doing, oh my God, they missed out, say, on their last year AAA to even get opportunities, so they might not get opportunities now. They're sort of caught in the middle of all of this. The 2004, some of them can step into junior hockey and are fortunate that way where they can see some light at the end of the tunnel. But then you take the 2005s, and that is the Saskatchewan 2005 group has got to be one of the best groups across Canada. It was, I think, last year I believe it was. I know my numbers are off, but we had probably 70% of the first round in the WHL draft came out of Saskatchewan. It's just a phenomenal age group, and where I feel really bad for that age group is that life experience of going to those camps, and they're all over Instagram, and the teams are promoting those players, and it's a great life experience for those kids and those families. And for some of them, that's their 15 minutes of fame in life, and it's their sort of, when they look back, it's kind of something cool to, hey, I went to this camp and I was drafted by this team, and whatever, I played some hockey and yeah, it was fun. And I mean, how do you put a price tag on that stuff? And how can you devalue anything when it comes to the kids across this country when you're just locking us up in our homes? I'm not saying that there isn't, that COVID shouldn't be respected. I'm not saying that the government shouldn't have a proactive approach with COVID, but I believe a progressive, sort of well thought out, approach that sort of a win-win for both sides is definitely there. I don't see how we can continue this much longer. It's unsustainable for us as a society. It's unsustainable for our sports. So that's where I sort of stand with all of that stuff.
That's quite a big stance, Kevin. I'm not going to lie. There was a lot of different spin-offs there. I didn't want to cut you off because it went from, we talked about it from the kid perspective, from the business perspective, from the league perspective, from the handout perspective to the, barely keeping the lights on. I mean, all systems are in a minimalist scenario.
Yeah.
And, platforms are being used to discuss, potential outcomes, changes to the programs, obviously looking after the safety and the health of all Canadians in every way, shape, or form. The one voice that hasn't been on display as much as it should, because they really don't have their platform or they're too young to, and that's the kids. Yeah. Because they're the ones that are ultimately missing out on everything. We can't have them really say much because they just don't know how, perhaps, or they haven't been given that opportunity. And I mean, I watch programs in the U.S. and I see let them play. And of course, some of the leagues are still participating in the United States, and how they're handling their business is their own business. But are we just too complacent with everything, or is it the fact that we need to follow with, like you said, a more progressive mindset to at least know that if nothing is going to happen sooner, then we need to make sure we're planning for the latter?
Well, I guess it depends what side of the argument you stand on with that, because some people are creating a scenario where it's end times, blah blah blah, and the rest of us are try to find a progressive way to live. And I do believe, I would hope most people would want to be on the progressive side, and it's true. Like, somebody has to advocate for our kids, and people can say, well, this isn't about advocating for kids, it's about safety. No, it is about advocating for kids, because today's pandemic with COVID will become tomorrow's pandemic with mental health, and mental health costs will be astronomically higher than the COVID costs because we are extremely limited with our mental health capacities across the board, across Canada. We only have a certain amount of beds for people who are going through depression and suicide attempts, and that'll be the next pandemic that's happening. Now, what I really liked was, and I thought it was absolutely, I was really happy to see that was when Tom Remy from Hockey Canada really stepped up and said, and he started talking about that. And that's the first time I've heard anyone from within the governing bodies really step up and say something. And Tom Remy is a huge voice of reason in this. And I'm super happy that he took it upon himself to start trying to get this ball rolling, because we do need people to step up and say things. And it's not for myself. It's not so much you paid your registration fees and, oh well, now your registration fees. I would rather see my governing bodies defend our kids and advocate for our kids, and that sort of talk shouldn't really, it shouldn't come from parents. It should be coming from people that have that kind of influence. And it's nice to see that people are starting to come out though and say things, because I believe it's high time we do say something. Because if we don't say nothing, that's a green light just to keep everything, unfortunately closed. And ultimately, our kids, our families, everybody's stuck in this scenario for much longer if we don't say something.
Yeah, one item that we, obviously a lot of us cannot discuss yet is what's going to happen next, because we certainly don't know. And I mean, Kevin, I want to appreciate you diving into the numbers with me and really looking at the scope of other industry that is affected and the power of the dollar spent within an arena and how much is spent in conjunction with outside of the rink. It truly is, we look at how much sport and recreation, I'm using the word sport and recreation as everybody involved in participating in any sport, and especially hockey, because this is hockey season. This is what Saskatchewan and Manitoba love to do during these winter times. It gets us through a lot of these winter times. We just don't know when and if things will, or they're going to get better, but we just don't know when it's going to happen. And Kevin, I really want to thank you for spending some time with me today to discuss that.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to come out and kind of try to, hopefully, I mean, all we can do is talk about this and try and shed some light on, and hopefully the message gets through to the right people, and we can start to see a little light at the end of the tunnel here. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Kevin Henry, Director of Performance Hockey Development, father of two, and it can, obviously raising some factors. Really, really appreciate it, Kevin. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
This has been On the Ice on Amateur Sports TV. Thanks for watching Tuesdays and Thursday nights, 7 o'clock. Stay with us, and we'll have some more great episodes each and every week on all our social media platforms. Take care and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye for now.